Imagine working for 40 years, paying taxes every paycheck, believing that one day the system will finally take care of you. Then one morning you hear a sentence that sounds almost impossible. Social Security could run short of money by 2035. Not disappear completely, but enough to force benefit cuts. And suddenly, an uncomfortable question appears. What exactly have people been paying into all these years? Because most Americans think Social Security works like a retirement savings account. You pay in, the government holds it, you collect it later. Simple. Except that's not actually how the system works. Social Security is closer to a moving conveyor belt. The money workers pay today mostly goes directly to current retirees. Today's workforce funds today's benefits. And tomorrow's workforce is expected to fund tomorrow's retirees. For decades, this worked surprisingly well. Because the math worked. Large numbers of workers, fewer retirees, longer economic growth. But demographics change slowly, until suddenly they don't. People are living longer now. Birth rates are lower, and the ratio holding the system together has shifted dramatically. In the 1960s, more than 5 workers supported each retiree. Now it's closer to 3. And eventually, it may fall even further. That's where the pressure begins. Because Social Security was never designed for a population aging this quickly. And yet politically, it became untouchable, which created a strange situation. Everyone knows the problem exists, but fixing it is politically dangerous. Raise taxes? Cut benefits? Even worse. Raise the retirement age? Also unpopular. So instead, the system keeps moving forward quietly, and the trust fund becomes the center of the conversation. Now, the phrase trust fund sounds reassuring, stable, permanent, but the reality is less dramatic than people imagine. When Social Security collected more money than it needed in previous decades, the surplus was invested into government securities. Essentially, the government borrowed from itself. And now those reserves are being depleted faster as retirements increase. That's why 2035 matters. Not because Social Security suddenly vanishes that year, but because projections suggest the reserves may become insufficient to fully cover promised benefits. Current payroll taxes would still fund much of the system, but not all of it, which means automatic cuts could happen unless changes are made. Issue. Many Americans don't have enough private retirement savings to absorb that shock. Because over the last few decades, retirement quietly changed. Previous generations relied heavily on pensions, guaranteed income for life, predictable, stable. But corporations gradually moved away from pensions toward 401ks, and that shift transferred responsibility from companies to individuals. At first glance, it sounded empowering. You control your investments, your future, your retirement. But there was a catch. Managing long-term financial risk is extremely difficult, especially for ordinary workers juggling rent, healthcare, debt, and rising living costs. And unlike pensions, 401ks depend heavily on market performance, which means retirement security became tied to volatility. Market crashes create panic, and timing suddenly matters enormously. Retire during a strong market, you may survive comfortably. Retire during a downturn, the math changes quickly. Now add inflation to the equation, because even when retirement accounts grow numerically, purchasing power can weaken underneath. $1 million once sounded enormous. Today, in many cities, it sounds less permanent than people expected, especially with healthcare costs rising faster than many retirees anticipated. And this creates another uncomfortable reality. A growing number of Americans are reaching retirement age without enough savings, while also depending heavily on Social Security. That dependence matters, because Social Security was never intended to fully replace income. It was designed as a foundation, but for millions of people, it became the entire structure, and that changes the stakes completely. Now zoom out further. The retirement crisis isn't just about economics. It's about time. Because retirement systems rely on long-term assumptions. Stable careers, steady wages, affordable living costs, consistent contributions over decades. But modern work has become less stable. Gig work increased. Job switching became common. Pensions declined. Housing costs surged. Meanwhile, people are expected to independently manage investment portfolios sophisticated enough to survive decades of uncertainty. That's a remarkable expectation when you think about it, especially considering many people barely have time to understand their monthly expenses, let alone global financial markets. And yet the public conversation around retirement still often sounds strangely optimistic. Invest early, save consistently. Everything works out. Sometimes it does. But increasingly, the underlying math looks tighter than previous generations experienced. And younger workers notice this. Many already assume Social Security will provide less by the time they retire. Not necessarily because the program disappears, but because confidence in long-term promises is weakening. That shift in belief changes behavior. People delay retirement, work longer, save more aggressively, or in some cases, stop believing retirement is realistic at all. And there's irony here. The modern economy became more productive than ever. Technology improved, markets expanded, wealth increased dramatically. Yet many people feel less certain about old age than previous generations did. Not because society became poorer overall, but because risk became more individualized, quietly, over decades. Now, realistically, Social Security probably does not vanish entirely. Politically, that would be catastrophic. The system gets adjusted. Higher taxes, later retirement ages, reduced future benefits, some combination of all three. But every solution creates trade-offs, and none of them feel painless. Which is why the issue keeps getting delayed, until eventually, delay itself becomes part of the crisis. So maybe the real question isn't whether Social Security survives. It probably will in some form. The real question is something less comfortable. What happens when an entire generation spends decades working inside an economy, only to discover the definition of retirement security quietly changed while they were busy trying to survive it?